Hey, writers, we are wrapping up KidLit Summer Camp. We want to thank you all for the great questions that you've brought us during the live Q&A sessions. And I have asked a couple of the coaches to come on here with me one last time to answer some questions that were sent ahead of time for those who could not make the live Q&A. And so first, I would like to welcome Sharon Skinner. Welcome, Sharon.
Hi there. It's good to see you again, always.
And welcome, Erin Radniecki.
Hi, Sarah. Hi, Sharon.
All right, we are going to just dig into some questions here and we'll hop right to it here. Okay, I did want to say there was one question that has been submitted a couple of times from some folks, and I just wanted to make sure that people are finding the links to the KidLit Summer Camp directory. So if you are looking for links, whether it's to podcasts, like Sharon hosts a podcast, if you're looking for a link to Sharon's podcast, it's in the directory. If you're looking to a link for Erin's ecosystem resource, it is in the directory. Everything is in the directory, and you'll be able to find links to all the interviews and all the guests and their websites and their socials and their resources and all the stuff. So look in the directory if you're looking for something. If you are looking for something that a specific coach offers and you don't see it in the directory, then please contact that coach directly and they will point you to where you want to go. Okay, so that's the first question. Very easy to answer. We're already killing it. All right, so let's get to the second question, which is a good juicy one here. And I'm going to toss this one to Sharon first. Okay, so we have someone who has had a chance to submit to an editor, and now this deadline has closed. What should they do? Can they still submit to the editor, or has that ship sailed?
Well, so we're going to start with my favorite answer. It depends, right? And it's very dependent on how the window was opened for you for that timeline. So if you were attending a conference or a retreat or a webinar or something of that nature, and this particular editor or agent opened up a window of submission to the attendees, then if that deadline has passed, you're out of luck. You really, really need to pay attention to those windows. They offer those windows to be generous, and if they're typically closed or if they're typically swamped, that is a very generous offer, and you should submit during that window. If, however, you were asked to submit something within a certain amount of time because you queried and they were open to seeing your pages or your full manuscript and they gave you a preferred deadline, if life happened for you, you can certainly send to them and say, life happened, but I really wanted to make sure that I circled back and touched base with you about this generous offer that you made to look at my work, and be very kind, be very polite, be very personable, and that might serve you.
Yeah, and you're talking about like in that last case scenario, you're talking about a more like one-to-one interaction, like if an editor
Yeah.
specifically had requested
Mhm.
of this one person, not like a group like they might have at a conference.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm thinking more in terms of if you met someone, even if
Yeah,
you were at a conference and you were having a conversation with them and they said, "Oh, I'd like to see that. Can you send it to me this month?" You get that kind of an invite. Make sure that you let them know where you talked to them, what they had said, and then be very kind and generous about the way that you approach them, and ask if they are still able and willing to look at it.
yeah, yeah. And I suppose we would be remiss if we didn't talk about this question is not specifically about this, but I feel like it's kind of in the same vein. This is a reason, writers, why you don't want to query unless your full manuscript, your full like additional manuscripts, if you're sending picture books, like you want to make sure the whole kit and caboodle is ready to go, because if someone requested it of you and then it wasn't ready and that's why we're late, then this is a problem. Okay, so I think we've got that one. Okay, so we have another question. We've had a lot of questions just in general this week, even popping up on the live Q&As about the various types of feedback we might get on our work. So we've got beta readers, we've got critique partners, we've got book coaches, we've got developmental editors. Writers hear about these kinds of services and readers and feedback options all the time. But there's maybe some questions around what do I need at what time? Who do I need to work with at what time? So, Erin, how about you start us on this one?
All
Let's
right.
start with the free resources first, which typically tend to be beta readers and critique partners. And I say free, but they're kind of not, because often we're exchanging time, and time is money. So
Time is money. Yep.
yeah, so maybe could you distinguish for the writers here between beta readers and critique partners?
Right. So really it's about where your writing is in the process. So in a beta reader, you're giving them a complete manuscript. You are giving them your story in what you believe to be close to a finished form to see how it lands with them. With a critique partner, you may be giving them a complete manuscript, but you also may be working with a critique partner as you are drafting or as you are revising. And that tends to be a longer ongoing relationship where you probably are exchanging pages and returning the favor for them. So one is a beta reader is more one way. You are giving them your writing, they are giving you feedback. Critique partner is more of a two-way street. Everyone's giving and getting in that relationship.
Yeah, I like that distinction, because sometimes beta readers can just be like people who are good readers, like thoughtful readers, but they
Yep.
might not write themselves. But usually critique partners are also writers who may or may not. There's pros or cons to working with critique partners in your genre and age category versus working with those that are from outside of it. Okay, so that is great. And then we've got these like two, oh, you want to add something with the betas?
Erin,
Yeah.
I did just want to add one little thing. When you're working with a critique partner, especially if it's ongoing, you kind of get to know each other a little bit and kind of know the flow and what you're looking for. But with a beta reader, sometimes you don't know them that well, and or you may not have had an established relationship. And I always recommend to all of my writers that when you're sending a manuscript to a beta reader, that you give them a list of questions that you would like them to be thinking about when they're reading it. Things like, do the characters hold true? Do you are there any places where you get bored? Are there any places where you're confused and kicked out of the manuscript or out of the story? Are there, what are, those kinds of things? Does the villain seem flat to you? Usually those questions are pretty standard, but sometimes you'll come up with one or two that stem from what you may already know your book might need. And that can really be helpful, because beta readers don't always, even if they're good readers, don't always know how to give good feedback on what is working and what isn't working. And so it's good to be really specific in what you're asking them to give you feedback on.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because beta reader, the whole situation can be a little and critique partner can be a little precarious if you're not mindful about how you're choosing those interactions. Okay, awesome. Now let's talk about where money is usually involved. So maybe we're spending money, we might be saving time. Between working with a book coach and an editor. So Erin, can you break it down for us, the difference between these two professionals?
Sure. So I'll start with editor because I think that is contained in a package. It's a pretty standard package. You are providing them with your manuscript, and they are providing you with feedback. And it is just kind of a one-time interaction. Usually, you may have a coaching call, you may not. I think likely it's just the written feedback. But with a book coach, it can be so many things that the writer needs at different points. So yes, it can be looking at a finished manuscript. I think being a book coach really shines though when you get pulled into the process earlier and have a chance to help the writer finesse things before they get to the end of the process. So there's just a lot more potential and possibility when you're working with a coach for more things to happen, for things to bloom, to grow, and to really come to, what their best outcome could be. That's my take. Sharon, what do you say?
I agree with that. And also, I would add that many of us as book coaches offer both editorial services and book coaching. And typically, when you get an editorial service from a book coach, you will get those coaching calls. You might get that initial discussion and a follow up call after the written feedback, after you've had time to sit with it in case you have additional questions or want to discuss something more deeply. But when you're working with a book coach as a book coach, the difference there is that we can get a lot deeper into what you're doing. When I have a lot of times authors will come to me with a manuscript that is complete and they just don't know why it's not working. And I can go through it with them and help them to deepen the story. I can look at it and figure out, do they need me to walk them through more character development? Do they need me to work on them with world building? Do they need me to work on them with some specific aspects, language, nuance, voice, tone, whatever those things might be for that particular work? It's a lot harder to do all of that in a single edit. In a developmental edit will help you with the story, with the plot gaps, the plot holes, the character arc, and things like that. Whereas a line edit would be more in tone and nuance and mode and language and deepening in that regard. But when you're working with a book coach, you get a little bit of all of that. So you can work through it and get a lot deeper and get more things done, I think, through that process.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think we've kind of covered, but where would a writer expect at what stage in the process? Maybe let's start let's start at the writing process. Let's not look at each of these different types of readers, but if I'm a writer who has an idea for a story, at this stage in the game, we're working with a book coach if we want to help develop the story and the structure and all of that sort of thing. We might, I say might with a very strong might, might be working with our critique partner if it's someone that we really trust and who has impeccable taste and it is not trying to make it their story, but is good at reflecting back to us what we're trying to do. And so like, let's walk through now that we're at the starting stage. Let's say I'm writing my first draft. Which of these readers am I working with if I'm in the writing the first draft phase?
Well, you could be working with a critique partner. You could be working with a book coach. It's too early in the process for
Yeah.
beta reader and for too early in the process for an editor.
Yeah. Okay, so let's say I have made it to the point of writing the end. Congratulations to me. And now I've got a finished first draft. Now who am I working with? Sharon.
Well, then now you're ready for, you could still work with your critique partner. That's absolutely an option. If you have a solid critique partner that understands story structure and all of the components that you're looking for, and that's the hope. The hope is that we're working with really strong critique partners when we have them. And you could also be working with a beta reader and getting that kind of feedback on a full manuscript. I often believe that I would work with a beta reader before an editor because I want to make sure that what I'm paying for with an editor is solid work, that it's ready for that level of feedback. And so I have beta readers that I do this with. So before it ever goes to my editor, it goes to my beta readers and they will find the little holes, the chinks, the inconsistencies, the continuity issues, the things that I don't really necessarily need the editor to look at. I want the editor to be then being able to take it and level it up. So at that point, I would be working with an editor or a book coach. A book coach can do all of those things as well. Like I said earlier, a book coach can help you through all of those levels and that working on that story to make sure that all of those holes and chinks and dents and scratches are filled in and bring your manuscript, your story up to a high level.
Yeah. Can I circle back with you on this question? Because I know that you have an established relationship with a publishing house already and an editing staff. What would you be doing if you were at the point of querying would you still be working with a beta before a developmental edit?
I probably would.
Okay.
That's the process that works for me, is to get the it's sort of like when you're getting ready to paint a car or something, and or a table that you've made, and you want to get the really rough spots out first before you start sanding it down with the finer grit sandpaper before you lay on your stain or your paint. And
Yeah.
it's so, and bring up that high gloss, right? That real shine. And that's what, for me, beta readers help me get those chinks out when I know it's not ready for edit yet, or I know it's not ready for a book coach yet at a developmental edit place, or a full-on edit, line edit, or what have you. I'm looking for all right, where did I slip up?
Yep.
I can't see it anymore. I can't see because what happens is when you're revising and you're working on your own work, you get so many versions of the story in your head that it becomes very hard to know which one is currently on the page, from page one all the way to the end. When I'm working with clients, I can keep their stories in my head all the way from page one to the end, in whatever version they give me. For whatever reason, I know their characters, I know their worlds. This is just I don't know. I think it's a book coaching superpower. Erin, correct me if I'm wrong, but I can keep all of that in my head. But when it's my own work, I struggle to know which version of the story that's been inside my head is on the page in this 12th iteration or 10th iteration or whatever it happens to be. So I like using my beta readers for that first. And
Yeah.
then I would go to a higher level. I would go to a book coach. I would go to an editor. I would go to someone who, okay, now I'm ready to put my money on the line and say, hey, all right, let's take this from good to gold and work on it.
Yeah, because if there has ever been a time, it is hard to break in and
Right now, it's
hard to
tough.
break
You've
into
got
the
to.
market. Yeah.
There's always room for awesome, but it's got to be awesome, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So then we're probably working with a book coach and or editor before querying. Um, Maybe a very savvy critique partner might be able to get you there. But the point being, we've got to get feedback on our work.
Absolutely. And I'm finding right now, back to what you just said about how tough it is to break in right now, and how tough it is to get that offer. Right? I'm working with a number of clients who are coming to me who have been in the query trenches for a while, and they have a solid query letter and they have a completed manuscript that has been through beta and critique partners. And they're coming to me and saying, something's not working. I'm not getting the offers that I'm not getting
Mm, hmm.
full requests. I'm just not getting over that hump, right? So the query letter is working, they think they don't, they're getting rejections like, yeah, it's just not quite for me, or it's just not quite right. I recently interviewed Sarah Fujimura on my Coaching KidLit podcast, and one of the things we talked about was that you can fix a lot of things. You can fix, oh, the character's not working, or the plot's not solid, or what have you, but what you can't really fix is, I loved it but I didn't love it enough.
Hmm.
Right? So that is part of the challenge that we're seeing out there right now, is that it's tough to get that. I loved it so much, I'm making an
Yeah.
offer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Erin, you mentioned how you particularly enjoy like working with writers, maybe as they're developing their story. I noticed, I just want to call out to everybody, Erin's our nature writing person here. And even the words you were using, like bloom and grow, I was like, that's so on point for you. But can you explain why that might be helpful? Because that's not something that a lot of writers know is even possible. So can you explain what kind of work you're doing when you talk about working with a writer early in the process?
Mhm. So I think early in the process, writers tend to be really in love with and really have spent a lot of time dreaming about all the bells and whistles and the beautiful things that they love about their story, and maybe have not spent enough time thinking about some of these foundational elements about their main character and what they want and why they want it, what's standing in their way, those sorts of things. So when we are at the beginning of the process, it can be really helpful to have someone who's there saying, okay, this is all this beautiful world that you've created is amazing. This lore, this, whatever it is, these are all wonderful things. Can we set them aside for a minute and really nail down what does your character want? Why can't they get it? What choices are they going to make? And really start to define that, so that then you can add back all those fabulous, lovely, wonderful things that you've been dreaming of. And then those elements then have a purpose. They have something to rest upon. And that, I think, is such a benefit to do that work early on. And I think it's something that people kind of just don't think about. They think, oh, I'm going to get help later on. I'm going to get help. I'm going to get use a book coach or get a critique partner later on, when I have a manuscript. But at that point, you've already spent so much time writing, and these issues are going to be baked in, and you're going to have to do so much work going back to the beginning to get these foundational elements figured out. So that is why I love to work with people early on in the process, because I can help them create a foundation that will support all the beautiful little details that they've been dreaming about, and they can still have a place in their story.
Yep. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. I think it is time consuming, and it's fun, and it's wonderful to explore your passion. But if you're serious about this and you really want to get a book out into the world, then starting with someone who can give you that feedback early on is really helpful, because a lot of, like I said, a lot of the clients who I work with, especially in fantasy, because in fantasy, we want to build these great big worlds and have these marvelous settings and all these, magical systems and all of that. But then when it comes time to read the story doesn't really take us anywhere, because it's this beautiful world. But once we step inside and we look around, then what? Right. And so a lot of times what I find is that exactly what you're saying, Erin, it's the character journey, it's the character arc that what we're not seeing enough of. And we have to go back and we have to build that, and then build that into the world and into the story. And some of those plot points no longer will be pushing the right buttons, because they're not the right conflicts, or they're not the right tension for the internal conflicts, the internal issues, the wants and needs of the character. And then we still have to go back in and clean all of that up through character lens. So even the world, as built as it is, needs to then be reviewed through character lens. So that's some very layered work that I do with clients if they don't come to me early on in the process.
Yeah. I myself, I very much enjoy working with a coach at the beginning. I really hate to write first drafts. And if any of the writers have attended any of the live Q&A sessions, they know this, because I feel like I say this all the time. I really don't like to write first drafts. And so I like to know that what I am working on has at least the possibility of going the distance, right? I don't want to get halfway through and realize that I've written 35,000 words and it's not going, that sounds horrible to me. So I do like to work with someone at the beginning myself. I think it's time saver and it gives you peace of mind. Okay. I'm going to toss this one to Erin. Erin, anthropomorphic characters. Do we love them or do we hate them? So in recent years, there's been maybe, for context for people who might be wondering what this question is about. In recent years, there's been a move away from anthropomorphic characters for normal living daily life kind of stories, like Allie the alligator goes to school. We're seeing less of that kind of story. So what do we think about anthropomorphic characters just in general, and when might we want to go ahead and use them and when might we not?
So I love anthropomorphic characters, but the thing I love most about them is they get the reader into a place where a human character can't really go. I think that's where anthropomorphism really shines, because what if I as a human can walk into the school, into a job, into wherever, then yes, you could put an animal character doing those same things. But what do I learn? What do I gain? Why couldn't I just use a human character? But what are the places where humans can't get into? What are the points of view? What is the viewpoint that you gain from using an animal character? And I think that's what we really want to explore. And yeah, like you say, yes, okay, lots of woodland critters can have their first day of kindergarten. Great. That could also be a classroom of kids, human kids. So really, I want to know, what is the reason that you're choosing to use an animal character? Why are you choosing that specific animal? What is their strengths, their abilities? What is that allowing you to do in your story that you couldn't do with a human character? So I think I love anthropomorphic characters, and yeah, they're fun to use, but really, to do it well, I think there has to be an intentionality behind it. There has to be a reason. There has to be something that using a fox or a koala or a capybara gets you that you wouldn't get if you were using a human character. So how does that land, Sarah?
Well, I'm going to toss it to Sharon. I mean, what you say makes very good sense to me, and I agree. Sharon,
Yeah,
do you have anything to add to that?
I agree. I want to pull a piece of what you said out of your comment, and that is, how is that viewpoint feeding the story? What is it doing for the story? And that's really the key right there, because if you look at something like The Eyes and the Impossible by Dave Eggers, that had to be an animal story, right? That had to be an animal story. If you look at something like We Don't Bite Our Classmates, and I can't remember who wrote it, but it's a great picture book. And I believe that the character's a dinosaur. And there's a reason for why we write speculative fiction and why we use some characters as and some creatures as characters in our books when we write speculative fiction. And that is to give us enough distance from the situation that we're not smacking somebody in the face and calling them out for their behaviors. We're trying to talk about things that we want to talk about that happen in the real world, issues that we're concerned about, but we're doing it through a bit of a layered methodology where we put some arm's distance. You got to think Star Trek when they first started doing all the things that they did on Star Trek. And I know that's not KidLit, but the idea behind it was behind science fiction, fantasy, speculative fiction is really it really helps us to look at real issues, but at enough distance so that we don't feel called out. So I think there are some things sometimes when having a shark who acts up in class is a good way to approach it. But again, as you say, we are looking to have more representation right now. We want kids to see themselves in books. But I don't know. I'm one of those kids that if you put a lizard or a shark or something and I have that behavior, I'm going to see myself in that book, right? I'm going to see myself even as an animal because of my imagination. But I think that there is a lot to be said for, you've got to make sure that the reason for the viewpoint makes sense. Don't just make them animals because, oh, they're cute.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. We've got a thunderstorm raging on outside, so hopefully that will not impact this call. But okay, Sharon, I'm going to toss this next question to you. How do I know if I am writing middle grade or YA?
That is such a good question. And we get it all the time. So I actually have an entire workshop that's about understanding categories, age category, what we call category in KidLit. So genre being your big umbrella, you can have horror, and then you have categories under that. You can have romance, and to a certain point, sweet romance goes all the way down into middle grade now. You can have adventure, and it goes all the way to picture book. But underneath each of those genres, we're slicing and dicing by age category, not because it's easier to shelve it, but because kids have specific requirements that they need when they're reading. So when we get up to the middle grade and young adult areas, and now we're seeing even middle grade is being, so a number of years ago, we saw YA start to be split off into edgy YA and, right? So you had your basic YA and your edgy YA. And then they even went to new adult because of the topics that were being looked at and the issues that were being discussed in those books. Middle grade has even started to get sliced and diced down now into upper middle grade and younger middle grade, and then your standard middle grade. That's kind of across the board. So it's really about what the kids are, what is going on in their worlds, which when you're in middle grade, you're trying to see where you fit, like with your peers and, discover that sort of thing and navigate a world that's been built by adults and not by kids. And you're having to navigate a lot. And then you have to navigate the collective peer system that you are being exposed to. It's no longer just about hanging out and just playing in the sandbox. It's you're dealing with bigger issues and popularity and things like that. With YA, you're starting to get into true romance, and you're building those relationships, and you're looking to see who you are in the world at large, outside of that insulated area, that insulated world that is middle grade. Now you're looking to see who you are in the bigger world out there with all the things going on and the on the edge of adulthood and things like that. So when we look at middle grade and YA, we're really looking at what are the issues that you're dealing with in your book, whether you're writing horror or fantasy or contemporary or whatever it is. What is the world that is right there for those kiddos? Because middle grade kiddos don't have the autonomy that older YA kids have, YA readers have, and they're not starting to see outside that door as broadly. So it's really about the issues that you're dealing with and are they age appropriate and how you're dealing with them in an age appropriate way. I mean, you could still deal with death. You can still deal with, I mean, there are a lot of middle grade books now that deal with very hard issues like parents in prison and drug abuse, siblings with drug abuse issues and things like that. But it's how you're dealing with it. And again, for me, this all comes back to the character lens and the interiority and what the character needs and wants in the story. And that's really, really, it all comes back to that.
Yeah. What do you
I hope
think,
that
Erin?
answered the question.
Yeah.
I would say, just want to, I agree with everything Sharon said. I just want to add, when we're talking about what's age appropriate, sometimes writers may think when they're writing for an older reader, so they're writing for YA, and maybe even new adult, sometimes they think, oh, if I have this adult novel, if I just take out the sex scenes, then I can market it as YA. And it's like, that's not going to work, because even though, yes, young adults are young adults, they're dealing with different issues. They are concerned about different things than what an adult is, even if that adult is still in their 20s. And so I think sometimes it's just, oh, if I just add some explicit scenes, I'm going to age it up, and if I take them out, I age it down. And it's not as simple as that. There's more to it. So yeah, so I think just wanted to throw that out there because that's something that's come across my desk before.
Yeah, I love that. And also, like, you can let the protagonist's age kind of guide you, but it is not a hard and fast rule. So the example I like to point people to is To Kill a Mockingbird. We've got a child protagonist, but this is an adult book. So just because you have a child character or a teen character does not make the book middle grade or YA. It's true that we don't often see adult protagonists in middle grade and YA, but we do. And so it's all about the reader, the ideal reader, to kind of know. And then I think, because there are some books that could kind of be like the lower YA. We mentioned younger YA and upper middle grade, and the you know, everything gets a little bit cloudy there, I think your best bet is to just read. You got to read, and you will, if you read enough books in middle grade and read enough books in YA, you will very clearly all of a sudden know where you're landing. So lots of things to think about. Maybe too, Sharon, I know that you like to deal a lot with language level issues. How might the language level be different between middle grade and YA?
Well, to be honest with you, I coach my writers not to write down to their target
Hmm.
audience because they will make assumptions about the language level of readers. But in middle grade, the typically, especially in younger middle grade, you need more context when you're
Hmm.
using words that may or may not be in the vocabulary. Now, you can go out online and you can find out what the words are that are appropriate to certain grade levels. You can go out and check that out, and you can find what the vocabulary is expected for a certain grade level. But you don't want to necessarily write down. Well, you definitely don't want to write down to your audience, and you can use bigger words that aren't in that normal vocabulary range as long as you give context. When I was reading as a kiddo, we didn't have as much KidLit back in the day. It's a couple of weeks ago. And I had a dictionary with me all the time. So I was that kid. Not all kids are going to be that kid, but I was always like, oh, I don't know what this word means. I'm going to go look it up. Right. And even if I didn't look it up right then, I would write it down so I could find it later. Right. But as
Right.
long as there was context for that word, I could keep reading. So as long as you give enough context for what the vocabulary is that you're using, then kids can go with it and they will go with it and they'll be perfectly fine with it. So I I don't recommend that you below that when you're doing early readers. Yes, there are some vocabulary that you definitely want to be focused on and make sure that you're staying within certain realms of making sure
Mhm.
that the kids can understand the books, because early readers are the books that they're learning to love books on, right? They might love books as picture books and they might have learned to love them then, but as independent readers, early readers is where they start to really learn to enjoy reading on their own. And so that's different. But at the middle grade level, you don't have to write down. Please don't write down
Yeah.
to your readers. The ones that there are readers who will know and they won't like it and they'll put your book aside and say, well, I don't like this. But you do have to be cognizant about concepts that
Yes.
might, it's more concept than language, I think, is what I would focus on when you're writing middle grade and when you're writing YA.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's also some confusion that I also want to address between, well, a 12-year-old could read my book, or an 18-year-old is also going to love my book, or a 30-year-old is also going to love my middle grade book. Like these are all things that can be true.
Mhm.
Absolutely, they can
Yeah.
be true, and they probably are true to some extent. But we really want to be thinking about like the ideal target audience. Just because someone outside of that audience might want to read it does not make it a book for all ages
Right.
necessarily. We still, is it a middle grade? Is it a YA? Is it an adult?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I have fans that read all my books.
right.
There are a couple of guys who, one's a retired plumber. They come to the book festival every year and they buy whatever new book I have. They have read all my books, like the middle grade books, everything, and they keep coming back for more. They enjoy my books, but that's because they know, because they have talked to me, they've gotten to know me, and they know I'm going to give them a good story, whatever the category is, right? But they're not my target reader. I didn't write that book for them. I wrote that book for middle graders. And I didn't even know that I was writing for quote unquote reluctant readers, but I have a book that has really been one of those books that parents come to me and say, my kid was a reluctant reader till they read your book. Well, I didn't write it for reluctant readers. I just was trying to write a good story.
Yeah.
This is a story that made me get up and jump around in the room and get all excited because I was writing that great dangerous scene in the boat, you know. I'm writing those kinds of books, and I was writing middle grade because I was writing for me as a middle grader, you know, the kiddo that I was. And, you know, yeah, it's a good story, but And yes, I have a few adult readers, but that's not my target audience.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's just like all of us here. We all read middle grade. We all read YA,
Yeah.
and we enjoy them.
Yeah.
And we enjoy them for what they are, but we also understand that we're not the ideal target reader
Yeah.
here. So keep that in mind too. Okay, well, these have been great questions. Sharon and Erin, I want to thank you for joining me. Sharon, where can writers connect with you?
So if you want to connect with me as a book coach and or editor, I am at bookcoachingbysharon.com. I'm all over the web as book coach Sharon Skinner. You can find me. If you Google Sharon Skinner, I come up usually 8 out of 10 of the top hits. And the other two are, one's a real estate agent and the other one is Sharon Skinner from the X-Files, and she's not even real. So there you go. And then if you are looking to see what I write and to see what I'm doing in the world as an author, you can find me at sharonskinner.com.
And if you go to one of those sites, writers, Sharon's got them linked,
Yeah,
so you'll
I have
find
them
the
linked.
other. It'll be
Yeah.
fine. And how about you, Erin? Where can people connect with you online?
Sure. So my website is writewithnature.com. That is also my Instagram handle. So
And that's right as in WRITE.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. And I am at solutionsforwriters.com, so you can find all the things there. And ladies, I just want to thank you again for sharing your time and your expertise. And writers, thank you for participating in KidLit Summer Camp and for asking your questions, which we do truly enjoy to dig into because questions are fun. At least I think so. So I want to thank you, everybody. And that will be the end of KidLit Summer Camp for 2025. And we will see you again next time. Bye, all.
Bye.
Bye.